She lost her puppies, then did something unbelievable. Have you ever seen a dog become a mother to kittens? Bailey, a loving family dog in Seattle, lost her puppies and fell into deep sadness. But one day, she walked in carrying a tiny kitten in her mouth, and what happened next shocked everyone. Was she stealing? Or was she saving lives? Stick around to find out. Speech balloon, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more amazing stories. Seattle was known for its misty mornings, endless coffee shops, and the vibrant pulse of city life. Yet, in a quiet suburban neighborhood, far from the hustle of downtown, lived a family whose world revolved around love, warmth, and an exceptional dog named Bailey. Bailey had entered the lives of Michael and Lauren Carter as a tiny, energetic puppy, full of curiosity and an eagerness to please. She had been just 8 weeks old when they brought her home from a local animal shelter, her big brown eyes shining with trust and excitement. "I think she knows we saved her," Lauren had whispered, cradling the puppy against her chest as they sat in the car. "Or maybe she's already planning how to turn our house upside down," Michael had joked, though the warmth in his voice betrayed how much he already loved their new companion. Bailey was an Australian Shepherd mix, with a thick golden coat, alert ears, and a gentle temperament. As the years passed, she grew into a remarkable dog, highly intelligent, deeply affectionate, and fiercely protective of the people she loved. But more than anything, Bailey had an uncanny maternal instinct. Her attachment to their daughter, Emma, was undeniable. From the moment Emma was born, Bailey had taken it upon herself to be the little girl's guardian. Wherever Emma went, Bailey followed, her expressive eyes watching over her like a silent protector. If Emma cried, Bailey was the first to run to her side. If she laughed, Bailey wagged her tail and shared joy. They were inseparable. As Emma turned 9, she had developed the same loving nature as Bailey. A bright and compassionate child with wavy brown hair and a sprinkle of freckles across her nose, she had a soft spot for all creatures, big and small. "You know, Bailey's not just a dog," Emma often told her friends at school. "She's like a second mom. She even tucks me in at night." Lauren would often watch the two curled up together on the couch, Emma's small hand resting on Bailey's fur as they both dozed off to the hum of the television. "Bailey has the heart of a mother," Lauren would say. And it was true. Everything changed one autumn evening when Bailey's maternal instincts were put to the test in a way no one could have expected. Seattle's crisp October air had rolled in, carrying the scent of rain and the sound of rustling leaves. Inside the Carter home, warm light spilled from the windows, casting a golden glow on the suburban street outside. The house was cozy, filled with the soft hum of conversation, the occasional bark of Bailey, and the distant sound of Emma's laughter from her bedroom. That night, as the family settled down after dinner, Lauren and Michael exchanged glances as Bailey curled up by the door, unusually restless. She whined softly, her ears twitching at every distant sound outside. "What's wrong with her?" Michael asked, setting down his glass of water. Lauren shook her head. "I don't know. She's been like this since this morning. She barely ate her breakfast, and she keeps staring out the window." Emma, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, reached out and stroked Bailey's back. "Maybe she heard something outside," she suggested. "You know how she gets when there's a raccoon or something in the yard, but this was different." Bailey wasn't just alert. She was troubled. Lauren kneeled beside the dog, running a hand gently over her fur. "Are you okay, sweet girl?" she murmured. Bailey let out a deep sigh but didn't move. The air in the room felt heavy, as if something unseen lingered just beyond the walls of their home. Then, late that night, as a storm rumbled in the distance and the first drops of rain began to patter against the roof, Bailey suddenly rose to her feet. A low whine escaped her throat as she pushed her nose against the front door, scratching lightly at the wood. Lauren and Michael were already in bed, but Emma, who had been reading under the covers, heard the soft scratching and slipped out of her room. "Bailey," she whispered, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She tiptoed down the hallway and found the dog standing there, her entire body tense. The rain had picked up now, tapping steadily against the windows. Emma's small fingers twisted the lock, and with a gentle creak, she cracked the door open just a little. Bailey immediately pushed through, stepping onto the porch, her nose in the air. "Bailey, wait," Emma whispered, stepping out behind her. She followed the dog to the edge of their yard, where Bailey stood perfectly still, her ears perked, staring into the darkness beyond the streetlights. Something was out there. Emma felt a shiver crawl up her spine. "Mom?" she called softly, but the wind carried her voice away. Bailey took one step forward, then another. Emma hesitated for a moment before following her, her bare feet cold against the damp grass. And that was the night their world began to change. The days following that eerie October night passed in a blur for the Carter family. Bailey's unusual behavior continued, leaving Lauren, Michael, and especially Emma increasingly worried. It wasn't just the restlessness. They noticed other changes, too. Bailey wasn't eating much. She barely wagged her tail, and the spark that usually lit up her brown eyes seemed to have dimmed. "Maybe she's just getting older," Michael suggested one morning as he poured coffee into his travel mug, preparing to leave for work. "She's only 5, Lauren replied, her brow furrowed as she watched Bailey lying near the window, her head resting on her paws. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." Emma sat quietly at the kitchen table, picking at her cereal. She hated seeing Bailey like this. Her best friend, who was usually so playful, so full of life, now seemed distant, almost like a ghost of herself. It wasn't until a week later that they realized what was happening. Lauren had been in the backyard hanging up bird feeders when she noticed Bailey circling a patch of grass near the shed. She was sniffing intently, her nose pressed to the ground, and every so often, she let out a soft, mournful whimper. "Bailey, what is it?" Lauren called, setting down the birdseed. Bailey didn't respond. Instead, she began to dig, slow, methodical, as if she were searching for something buried deep beneath the soil. "Bailey, stop!" Lauren rushed over and gently pulled the dog back by the collar. But as she did, her eyes caught something unusual in the dirt. A small, delicate bone. A chill ran down her spine. That night, Bailey's behavior intensified. She paced the house, whining at the door, as if she were waiting for something, or someone, that wasn't there. And then it happened. In the early hours of the morning, Bailey went into labor. Lauren and Michael had known she was pregnant, but they hadn't expected the puppies to arrive so soon. Emma had been overjoyed when they'd first told her Bailey was going to have babies. She'd spent hours preparing a little bed for the puppies, decorating it with soft blankets and a couple of her favorite stuffed animals. But now, as Bailey labored on the floor of the living room, something felt off. Lauren knelt beside her, gently stroking her fur. "You're doing great, sweet girl," she whispered. Emma sat nearby, clutching her father's hand, her wide eyes filled with a mix of awe and fear. She'd never seen anything like this before. After what felt like an eternity, the first puppy was born. Lauren reached out carefully, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped the tiny, wet bundle in a towel. But something was wrong. The puppy wasn't moving. "Michael!" Lauren's voice cracked as she gently tried to stimulate the puppy, rubbing its tiny chest. But it was no use. The little body remained limp in her hands. Emma's face crumpled. Is it okay?" she whispered. Michael's jaw tightened as he pulled Emma close, shielding her from the heartbreaking scene. One by one, the rest of the puppies were born. And one by one, they came into the world silent and still. By the time the last puppy had been delivered, Lauren's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the towel. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at Michael, who was pale and silent, his arm wrapped protectively around Emma. "I don't understand," Lauren choked out. She was healthy. The vet said everything looked fine. Bailey let out a low, mournful howl that sent shivers down all their spines. She nosed gently at the lifeless puppies, whining softly, as if begging them to wake up. Emma broke free from her father's grasp and threw her arms around Bailey's neck, sobbing into her fur. "I'm so sorry, Bailey," she cried. "I'm so sorry." The house was quiet for the rest of the day. No one knew what to say. Bailey's grief was palpable. She refused to eat, refused to leave the little bed Emma had made for the puppies. She just lay there, curled around the empty blankets, her eyes dull and filled with sorrow. Lauren called the vet, desperate for answers, but there was no clear explanation. "Sometimes these things just happen," the vet said gently. "It could have been a genetic issue, or maybe an infection we didn't catch. I'm so sorry. But sometimes these things just happen," wasn't enough to ease their pain. Days passed, and Bailey's condition didn't improve. She barely moved, except to nudge the empty blankets with her nose, as if she were still searching for her lost puppies. "I'm worried about her," Lauren admitted one evening as she and Michael sat on the couch, watching Bailey from across the room. "She's grieving," Michael said quietly, "just like we are." Emma, who had been listening from the hallway, wiped a tear from her cheek. She couldn't stand to see Bailey like this. The next morning, as the rain drizzled softly against the windows, Emma knelt beside Bailey's bed and whispered, "It's going to be okay, Bailey. I promise. We're going to get through this together." But as she stroked Bailey's fur, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, that their lives were about to take a turn no one could have predicted. The atmosphere in the Carter household had shifted. The lively energy that once filled their home had been replaced by a somber quietness. Bailey, once the heart of the family, now lay curled in a corner, unmoving. She barely acknowledged Emma's presence, nor did she react to the gentle words Lauren and Michael offered her. "She's fading," Lauren murmured one night as she watched Bailey from the couch. "It's like she doesn't want to be here anymore." Michael let out a tired sigh, rubbing his face. "I've never seen a dog grieve like this. It's breaking my heart." Emma overheard them, sitting silently on the staircase. She hugged her knees to her chest, swallowing the lump in her throat. Bailey was her best friend. She couldn't bear to lose her too. Then, something happened that none of them could have expected. It was a chilly Saturday morning, and Emma was outside playing in the backyard, absent-mindedly kicking at fallen leaves. Bailey lay in her usual spot near the shed, staring off into the distance. But then, without warning, the dog stood up. Emma's eyes widened. It had been days since Bailey had shown any real movement beyond shifting positions in her bed. Bailey sniffed the air, her ears twitching. Then, before Emma could call out, the dog trotted toward the fence, slipped through a gap between the posts, and disappeared into the neighbor's yard. "Bailey, wait!" Emma cried, scrambling after her. She rushed through the gate and into the open alley behind the row of houses. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the distant scent of damp wood and chimney smoke. Emma turned a corner just in time to see Bailey emerging from the overgrown lot behind an abandoned house. But she wasn't alone. In her mouth, Bailey gently carried a tiny, frail kitten. Emma froze. The kitten was impossibly small, barely the size of her palm, its fur a mix of white and gray, dirty and matted. It wasn't struggling, but it wasn't completely limp either. Bailey walked past Emma as if she weren't even there, heading straight for the house. Carefully, she padded over to her old nest, the same spot where she had tried to nurse her stillborn puppies, and laid the kitten down on the soft blankets. Emma's breath hitched. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Bailey curled herself around the kitten, just as she had done with her own lost babies. A soft, low whine escaped her throat as she nuzzled the tiny creature, licking its fur with gentle urgency. Emma's heart pounded. "Mom! Dad!" she screamed, running inside the house. Michael and Lauren came rushing in, alarmed. "What's wrong?" Michael asked, his eyes scanning Emma's pale face. "Bailey, Emma struggled to find the words. "She found a kitten, and she's taking care of it." Lauren and Michael exchanged confused looks before following Emma back to the living room. And there she was, Bailey, curled around the tiny kitten, licking it protectively, her body radiating warmth. "Oh my God," Lauren whispered. Michael knelt down beside Bailey, his brows furrowing. "Where the hell did she find it?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "I followed her. She went into the old house behind the alley and came out with it." The kitten let out a weak, pitiful mew, barely audible. Lauren immediately snapped into action. "We need to warm it up. Get a towel, Emma." Emma ran to grab one as Lauren carefully scooped up the kitten. Its tiny body trembled in her hands, and she could feel how dangerously cold it was. Bailey whined and tried to take the kitten back, nudging it gently with her nose. "She thinks it's hers," Michael murmured. Emma returned with a warm towel, and Lauren wrapped the kitten, holding it close to her chest. "It needs food," she said, worry creeping into her voice. "We need to get some kitten formula." Michael was already grabbing his car keys. "I'll run to the pet store." Bailey refused to leave the kitten's side. As soon as Lauren laid it down again in the nest, Bailey tucked it against her chest, letting out a deep sigh of relief. Emma sat beside her, gently stroking her back. "You're a good mama," she whispered, "even if they're not yours." By the time Michael returned, the kitten had warmed up slightly, but it was still weak. Lauren filled a tiny bottle with kitten formula and carefully brought it to the kitten's mouth. At first, it didn't respond. Emma's stomach clenched. "Come on," she pleaded softly. "You have to eat." Bailey let out a tiny whine, licking the kitten's head again, as if urging it to fight. And then, finally, the kitten latched onto the bottle and began to suckle. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "She's going to be okay," Lauren whispered, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Michael sat back against the couch, shaking his head. "This dog never ceases to amaze me." They all sat there in silence, watching as Bailey curled protectively around the kitten, licking it gently as it fed. For the first time since losing her puppies, Bailey's tail wagged. It was subtle, just a small twitch, but Emma saw it. And in that moment, she knew Bailey had found a new purpose. But what none of them knew yet was that this was only the beginning. The first kitten had been a miracle. Seeing Bailey slowly come back to life as she nurtured the tiny creature gave the Carter family a glimmer of hope. But they had no idea that this was just the beginning. A few days had passed since Bailey had brought the kitten home. The little one, whom Emma had named Whiskers, was growing stronger with each feeding. Bailey barely left its side, curling around Whiskers in the same way she had done with her lost puppies. One crisp autumn evening, as the family sat in the living room watching a movie, Bailey suddenly stood up. She stretched, let out a low whimper, and walked toward the front door. Emma, curled up on the couch with a blanket, immediately noticed. "Where are you going, Bailey?" she asked, setting down her bowl of popcorn. Bailey let out a small whine and pawed at the door. Michael glanced at Lauren. "She wants to go out," he said. Lauren frowned. "But she never wants to go out at night." Emma's heart pounded. What if she's going back for something? A heavy silence filled the room. They all remembered how Bailey had brought home Whiskers just a few nights ago. Michael sighed and stood up. "All right, I'll take her out." "I'm coming too," Emma insisted. Grabbing a flashlight, they stepped out into the chilly Seattle night. The air was damp with the lingering scent of rain, and the pavement glistened under the streetlights. Bailey moved with purpose, trotting straight toward the overgrown lot behind the abandoned house. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine as they reached the rusted fence. She had never liked this place. It always looked so eerie, especially at night. Bailey squeezed through the gap in the fence. Michael groaned. "Guess I'm going in too." He helped Emma climb through, and together, they followed Bailey deeper into the lot. The beam of the flashlight illuminated scattered debris, old wooden planks, broken furniture, and weeds growing through the cracks in the pavement. And then Emma saw them. 3 more kittens, huddled together inside a crumbling wooden crate. Their tiny bodies shivered against the cold. Their fur was dirty, their eyes wide with fear. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, her breath hitching. They're so small. Bailey stepped toward them and let out a soft whine, the same sound she had made the night she found Whiskers. Michael crouched down, inspecting the kittens. They look underfed, he murmured. Where's their mother? Emma scanned the lot, her heart pounding. Do you think she's dead? Michael didn't answer. Instead, he carefully scooped up one of the kittens, wrapping it in his jacket. We can't leave them here, he said. They won't survive the night. Bailey nosed gently at the kittens, then looked up at Michael, as if urging him to move faster. Emma picked up another kitten, holding it close to her chest. Let's take them home, she said firmly. By the time they got back to the house, Lauren's eyes widened in disbelief. 3 more, she gasped. We couldn't leave them, Michael said, setting the kittens down in the warm nest beside Whiskers. Bailey immediately curled around them, licking their fur and tucking them close to her body. Emma watched in awe. She really thinks they're hers, she whispered. Lauren exhaled. We need to get more formula. Michael nodded. I'll go back to the pet store first thing in the morning. That night, the family took turns feeding the kittens, ensuring each one got enough nourishment. It was exhausting, but as Emma watched Bailey nuzzle them lovingly, she knew they had done the right thing. Still, a question lingered in her mind. Where had these kittens come from? And why had Bailey been the one to find them? Little did they know, the answer would change everything. By the next morning, the Carter household had officially become a kitten nursery. Bailey had settled into her new role as a mother, curling protectively around the 4 tiny kittens, Whiskers, Shadow, Pumpkin, and Tiny. She licked their fur, kept them warm, and even nudged them toward their bottles when it was feeding time. Emma was in awe of how instinctively nurturing Bailey had become. She had been devastated after losing her puppies, but now she seemed alive again, her tail wagging softly as she guarded the kittens like they were her own. But something wasn't sitting right with Lauren. That morning, as she sipped her coffee and stared at the little ones snuggled against Bailey's fur, she glanced at Michael with a thoughtful expression. You know, she said, lowering her mug, it's really strange that Bailey found these kittens. Michael frowned. What do you mean? Lauren hesitated. What are the chances of her finding 4 abandoned kittens? All from the same litter. Alone in the cold? Michael leaned back in his chair. Are you saying someone left them there on purpose? I don't know, Lauren admitted. But I do know that if Bailey hadn't brought them here, they wouldn't have survived. Emma, who had been eavesdropping from the staircase, felt a knot form in her stomach. That thought had been nagging at her too. Where was the mother? That afternoon, while Emma was outside playing with Bailey, the first sign of trouble appeared. Emma. She turned toward the street and saw Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, standing on the sidewalk with a worried look on her face. Mrs. Henderson was well known in the neighborhood for taking care of stray cats. She had a soft spot for them and always left bowls of food on her porch. She was kind, but right now, her face was lined with concern. Hi, Mrs. Henderson, Emma said hesitantly. The old woman walked closer, adjusting her thick cardigan. Sweetheart, I don't mean to bother you, but have you seen any kittens around here? Emma's heart skipped a beat. Kittens? She echoed, trying to sound casual. Yes. Mrs. Henderson sighed, wringing her hands. My cat, Daisy, had a litter about a week ago. I kept them inside, but last night when I checked, they were gone. Emma's stomach dropped. Bailey, who had been sitting beside her, perked up at the mention of kittens. Mrs. Henderson didn't seem to notice the way Emma tensed up. She just shook her head and sighed. I don't know how they got out, but they're too little to survive on their own. I've looked everywhere, but they're just gone. Emma felt her throat tighten. She knew exactly where the kittens were. And worse, Bailey had been the one to take them. I haven't seen anything, Emma stammered. Mrs. Henderson gave her a gentle smile. Well, if you hear anything, let me know, dear. Emma nodded quickly. I will. As soon as Mrs. Henderson walked away, Emma spun around and knelt beside Bailey. Did you take them from her? She whispered urgently. Bailey just blinked at her, her warm brown eyes filled with innocence. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She had assumed the kittens had been abandoned, but now the truth was starting to unravel. That evening, Emma sat at the dinner table, picking at her food. The conversation between her parents drifted around her, but all she could think about was what she had learned. Bailey had taken the kittens, not from some random, abandoned place, from Mrs. Henderson's house. Emma finally cleared her throat. "Mom? Dad?" Lauren and Michael looked up. "What's up, sweetheart?" Lauren asked. Emma hesitated, then took a deep breath. I think Bailey took the kittens from Mrs. Henderson." Michael's fork froze midair. "What?" "She came up to me today," Emma admitted. "She said her cat had kittens, but they disappeared." Lauren and Michael exchanged a startled glance. "Oh my God," Lauren murmured. Michael set his fork down. "Are you sure?" Emma nodded. "I don't think they were abandoned, Dad. I think Bailey took them." A heavy silence filled the room. Michael ran a hand through his hair. "Well, that complicates things." Lauren pressed her lips together. "If they have a mother, we have to take them back." Emma's heart dropped. "But Bailey loves them," she whispered. Michael sighed. "Emma, they're not hers." Tears burned in Emma's eyes. "But what if their real mom can't take care of them? What if Bailey knew they needed help?" Lauren looked conflicted. "I don't know, honey." Emma clenched her hands into fists under the table. She had to find out the truth. The only way to do that was to follow Bailey. That night, Emma made a plan. She would wait until Bailey left the house again, and this time, she would follow her. She needed to know why Bailey had taken those kittens, and what she discovered next would change everything. Emma lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for Bailey to move. She had been thinking about it all night. Why had Bailey taken those kittens? She wasn't a thief. She was a good dog, the best dog Emma had ever known. If she had taken them, there had to be a reason. She just had to find out what it was. The clock on her nightstand glowed, 12:47 a.m. Emma's eyelids felt heavy, but just as she was about to drift off, she heard it, the soft padding of paws against the hardwood floor. Bailey was moving. Emma sat up quickly, careful not to make any noise. She peeked out her bedroom door and saw Bailey standing at the back door, her nose pressed against the glass. Emma's heartbeat sped up. This was it. Sliding out of bed, she tiptoed toward the kitchen, careful not to wake her parents. Bailey hadn't noticed her yet. Her whole focus was on the backyard. Then, with a gentle push, Bailey nudged the door open with her nose. Emma didn't hesitate. She slipped through the doorway and followed Bailey into the night. The air was cold and damp. The distant hum of the city was muffled by the towering trees in their neighborhood. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind and the soft crunch of Bailey's paws against the fallen leaves. Emma stayed back, moving carefully, her heart hammering. Bailey trotted toward the same broken fence behind the abandoned house. Emma crouched behind a bush as Bailey slipped through the gap. Then, she vanished. Emma's hands curled into fists. She had to keep going. Swallowing her fear, she pushed through the gap, wincing as a loose nail scraped her arm. And that's when she saw it. Bailey wasn't alone. A mother cat lay curled in the corner of the lot, her ribs showing through her thin fur. She was breathing heavily, her body weak, her eyes half-lidded. Next to her was an empty, filthy blanket, the place where the kittens had once been. Emma gasped. Bailey stepped forward and gently licked the cat's forehead. The cat gave a weak, pitiful meow. Emma felt a lump form in her throat. Bailey hadn't stolen the kittens. She had rescued them. Emma stepped closer, her foot snapping a twig. Bailey turned her head sharply. Her ears perked, and for a moment, Emma thought she might run. But then, Bailey did something unexpected. She wagged her tail. Emma stepped forward slowly, her heart pounding. "Bailey," she whispered, "is this where you got the kittens?" Bailey let out a soft whine and licked the sickly cat again. Emma swallowed hard. Mrs. Henderson had been wrong. Daisy, her cat, hadn't lost the kittens. She had been too weak to take care of them. Bailey must have found them, realized their mother couldn't feed them, and taken them somewhere safe. Emma felt tears welling in her eyes. "You knew," she whispered, kneeling beside Bailey. "You knew she couldn't take care of them." Bailey pressed her nose into Emma's shoulder, as if confirming her words. Emma looked at the frail mother cat. She needed help. Now, Emma burst through the back door of the house at full speed. "Mom, Dad, wake up," she shouted. Lauren and Michael bolted upright in their bed. "Emma?" Michael's groggy voice was thick with sleep. "What's going on?" "There's a cat, the mother. She's still in the abandoned lot, but she's sick. She's really sick." Lauren was already throwing on a sweater. "Show us." By the time they got back to the abandoned lot, the mother cat was barely conscious. Lauren knelt beside her and pressed 2 fingers against her tiny ribs. "She's dehydrated," she murmured. "She won't make it through the night if we leave her here." Michael sighed. "I'll get a blanket." As he rushed back to the house, Emma turned to Bailey, her voice trembling. "You did the right thing," she whispered. Bailey licked her hand, as if she had been waiting for Emma to understand all along. By morning, the mother cat, who Emma decided to name Luna, was curled in a warm bed in the Carter's laundry room. The vet confirmed she had an infection, but she would recover. The kittens, once thought to be stolen, had a mother again. And Bailey. Bailey had saved them all. But the story wasn't over yet. What happened next would turn Bailey into a legend. The house was quiet that morning, except for the gentle hum of the heater and the occasional soft mewing of the kittens. Luna, the frail mother cat, lay curled in the warm blankets Lauren had set up in the laundry room. She was still weak, but her breathing was steadier now, and for the first time since she had been brought in, she lifted her head. Emma sat beside her, stroking her thin fur, her thoughts spinning. Bailey had saved them all. She had known, before anyone else, that something was wrong. She had sensed that Luna was too weak to care for her babies. She had gone out, one by one, and rescued them herself. Emma glanced at Bailey, who lay stretched out on the floor, keeping a watchful eye on the kittens nestled beside Luna. "You knew, didn't you?" Emma whispered. "You knew she needed help." Bailey's tail gave a small wag, as if to say yes. Lauren knelt down beside them, resting a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "I still can't believe it," she murmured. "I've never heard of a dog doing something like this." Michael walked in, rubbing his face. "Well, believe it," he said, "because it happened." But just as the weight of everything began to settle, a knock sounded at the front door. Michael frowned. Who could that be this early? Emma's heart clenched. Mrs. Henderson. Michael pulled the door open to find the elderly woman standing on their porch, bundled in a heavy cardigan, her face lined with worry. "Michael, I'm sorry to bother you," she began, clutching her hands together. I know I talked to Emma yesterday, but she sighed heavily. "I can't stop thinking about my kittens." Emma's stomach twisted. Michael opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Bailey suddenly appeared at his side, pushing through the doorway and trotting out onto the porch. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened as Bailey stopped in front of her and looked up with those deep brown eyes. And then, Bailey turned and started walking, straight toward the laundry room. Lauren gasped. "Oh my God," Mrs. Henderson whispered. Emma didn't wait. She ran after Bailey, leading Mrs. Henderson inside. And then, as they stepped into the room, the truth lay before them. Luna, the kittens, and Bailey, standing protectively over all of them. Mrs. Henderson let out a shaky breath. "Oh, my sweet girl," she whispered, dropping to her knees in front of Luna. Emma bit her lip, watching as Mrs. Henderson gently reached out to stroke Luna's head. "She's so thin," Mrs. Henderson murmured. "I had no idea she was this sick." Lauren sighed. "Neither did we, until Bailey led Emma to her." Mrs. Henderson looked up sharply. "Bailey found her?" Emma nodded slowly. "She didn't steal the kittens," she said softly. She saved them." Bailey let out a low whine, stepping forward and nuzzling Mrs. Henderson's arm. The old woman let out a soft chuckle, her eyes glassy with emotion. "Well, I'll be damned," she whispered. She turned back to Luna, stroking her frail body. "I thought she had hidden them away somewhere and then lost track of them, but she was just too weak to take care of them." Emma swallowed hard. Bailey knew. Mrs. Henderson shook her head in disbelief, a tear slipping down her cheek. "She's an angel," she murmured. "An absolute angel." Lauren smiled. "That's what we've been saying for years." The story of Bailey and the kittens spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within a few days, the Carter family began receiving calls. Neighbors, reporters, even local animal rescue organizations who had heard about what Bailey had done. One evening, as Lauren was setting the dinner table, Michael walked in, shaking his head with a disbelieving smile. "You won't believe who just called me," he said. Lauren raised an eyebrow. "Who?" He held up his phone. "Seattle's biggest animal rescue shelter. They want to write a story about Bailey." Emma nearly dropped her fork. "A story?" Michael nodded. "Apparently, this kind of thing doesn't happen often." Lauren laughed. "I'd be surprised if it's ever happened at all." A week later, the local news station showed up at their doorstep. A smiling young reporter stood on the front lawn, microphone in hand, as the cameraman adjusted the shot. "So, tell me," she said, crouching down beside Bailey. "Bailey, how does it feel to be a hero?" Bailey wagged her tail, licking the microphone. The reporter laughed. "I think that means she's happy." Emma grinned, scratching Bailey's ears. "She's always been a hero to me." Lauren nodded. "She's got a heart bigger than any human I know." Michael crossed his arms with a proud smile. "She's one of a kind." The community responded in ways no one expected. People donated supplies to local shelters. Others reached out to adopt abandoned animals. Even Mrs. Henderson, who had always cared for strays, became a local advocate for animal welfare. "We can all learn something from Bailey," she said one evening on the news. "Kindness doesn't need words. It just needs action." And Bailey, well, she had already moved on to her next mission. One night, as Emma curled up beside her on the couch, she noticed Bailey's ears perk up at the sound of faint meowing outside. Emma's eyes widened. "Bailey," she whispered, her heart pounding. Bailey stood up, and Emma knew. She wasn't done yet. As Luna grew stronger, something incredible happened. Bailey had taken care of the kittens like they were her own. She had cleaned them, watched over them, and kept them warm. But now, Luna was ready to be their mother again. One evening, as the Carter family sat watching TV, something shifted. Bailey lay curled in her usual spot with the kittens nestled against her. But this time, Luna was right there beside her. And then, slowly, Bailey nudged one of the kittens toward Luna. Emma held her breath. Luna hesitated, then reached forward, wrapping her small body around her baby. Emma let out a choked breath. "She's giving them back," Lauren whispered. Bailey licked Luna's ear, then settled beside her, as if to say, "They were always yours." Bailey's story became something bigger than anyone had expected. She was featured on Seattle's biggest news outlets. People all over the city and beyond shared her story. But to Emma, Bailey wasn't just a hero. She was family. One night, as Emma lay in bed, she whispered into the quiet, "You're the best dog in the world, Bailey." Bailey, nestled beside her, let out a soft sigh and pressed her warm body against Emma's. No words were needed. Bailey had already proved that love wasn't about blood. It was about who you chose to care for. And Bailey? She chose everyone. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. If you watched until the end, comment, "I watched until the end," and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video on the end screen. It's really exciting.